The moment you stop carrying this pain, something shifts. The second you stop chasing them, they feel it. They always feel it, and what happens next is the cruelest thing you never saw coming. You spent months trying to get their attention, months sending the right texts, months showing up, months being patient, months asking yourself what was wrong with you, and none of it worked. Nothing moved them, nothing made them lean in. But the moment you stopped, the moment something inside you quietly said enough, everything changed. Not in the way you hoped. It changed in a way that was built, whether they meant it or not, to drag you straight back into the same cycle you had just broken free from. This is the final dirty trick. And by the time you finish reading this, you will understand exactly why they do it, what is going on inside them when they do it, and most importantly, what it means for you and what you should do about it. Before we go further, if you have ever felt this, if you have ever gotten this close to freedom only to be pulled back in at the last second, drop the word free in the comments right now, just free. And if you want to understand the thinking behind every confusing thing an avoidant has ever done to you, subscribe, because this channel goes deep into exactly that. Now let us talk about what is really happening. First, you need to understand something about the avoidant mind that most people never fully get. Avoidant people do not think about relationships the way you do. When you're in a relationship or even just an emotional connection with someone who has an avoidant attachment style, you are operating from a place where closeness feels like safety. For you, being close to someone you love is the goal. It is where you want to be. It is what feels right. But for them, closeness does not feel like safety. Closeness feels like a threat. Not because they are broken, not because they are bad people, but because their nervous system learned very early that getting too close to someone means eventually losing yourself. Somewhere back in their childhood, someone important to them, a parent, a caregiver, someone who was supposed to be their safe person, taught them that needing people leads to disappointment, that showing vulnerability leads to rejection, that depending on someone means getting hurt. So they built walls, high ones, and those walls became part of who they are. But here is the thing about walls. They only do one job. They keep things out. And for a long time, that worked perfectly for them. They kept their distance. They felt in control. They never let anyone get too close. They managed their emotions by not really having them, or at least not consciously. And they moved through relationships in one particular pattern. They would let you in just enough to feel something, just enough to make you feel chosen. And then when things got real, when depth started to build, when you started needing more from them, they would pull back, not always in a big dramatic way, sometimes just a little. A bit less responsive, a bit less warm, a bit more distant. And you, being someone who values connection, would naturally move closer to close that gap. And they would pull back a little more. And you would move a little closer again. And this dance, this painful, tiring, confusing dance would keep going, with you working harder and harder to hold on to a connection they were quietly letting slip away. Now, during all of this, while you were leaning in, while you were sending the late night messages, overthinking every little interaction, asking yourself what you could do differently, they were feeling something very specific. They were feeling comfortable, not in a warm way, in a familiar way. You were predictable, you were available, you were, in the language of their nervous system, contained. You were not going anywhere. So they did not have to do anything either. That is the quiet, unconscious calculation happening inside an avoidant person when someone is chasing them. The chasing itself signals safety. Not emotional safety, but relational safety, meaning this person is still here, meaning I do not have to do anything, meaning I can stay in my comfortable distance and still have this connection whenever I want it. So they kept you at arm's length. And you kept reaching until one day you stopped. Maybe it happened slowly. Maybe there was one moment. Maybe you just woke up one morning and something in you was different, something quieter, something that had finally accepted what your mind had been refusing to accept for a long time, that this was not going to change, that they were not suddenly going to become the partner you needed, that the relationship you kept imagining was mostly being built inside your own head. And something let go. It is a very particular kind of letting go. It is not angry, at least not at first. It feels more like exhaustion that has finally made peace with itself. It is the feeling of a muscle that has been clenched for months finally loosening. It is quiet, a little sad. But underneath the sadness, if you are being honest with yourself, there is also relief. You stopped reaching. You stopped checking your phone every 5 minutes. You stopped writing the perfect message meant to open them up. You stopped waiting. You slowly started turning your attention back toward yourself. And this is exactly when they feel it. Do not underestimate this part. Avoidant people are unusually tuned into the emotional temperature of the people around them. Not because they are naturally empathetic, though some of them are, but because their nervous system is always scanning for changes in the relationship around them. It is a survival habit. When you learn early that closeness is dangerous, you become very good at sensing small shifts in other people's energy. And the moment you stopped caring, they felt it. Not always consciously, not always in a way they could name or explain, but something registered inside them, something changed. Their nervous system, which had been perfectly comfortable with you chasing them, suddenly found itself somewhere new and unfamiliar. You were no longer available the way you used to be, no longer predictable, no longer contained. And for the first time in this whole dynamic, they felt something they are deeply uncomfortable feeling. They felt you slipping away. Now, this is where it gets really interesting because you might think, okay, great, they feel me pulling away. Maybe now they will finally appreciate what they had. Maybe now they will step up. Maybe now we can finally have the real conversation we should have had months ago. And the answer is maybe, but probably not in the way you are hoping, because an avoidant person does not respond to the fear of loss the way a secure person does. A secure person, when they sense a relationship is in danger, tends to move toward the problem. They start the hard conversation. They become more open. They show their cards. They say something like, I can feel something shifting and it scares me. Can we talk about it? An avoidant person does something completely different. An avoidant person pulls out the final dirty trick. And there are actually a few versions of this trick. They all come from the same root, but they show up differently depending on the person and the situation. Let us go through each one, because understanding them is the only real way to protect yourself. The first version is the sudden reappearance. After days or weeks, sometimes even months of distance, they come back warm, present, available. The version of them you always wanted finally shows up. They text first, they are engaged, they are funny and sweet. The conversation flows the way it always should have. They bring up inside jokes. They send something that shows they have been thinking about you. They say things like, I have been thinking about us, or I miss talking to you, or I know I have not been the most available person lately. And your heart does the thing you told yourself it would not do again. It opens up because this is the person you saw glimpses of before. This is the potential you have been holding on to. This feels like proof that everything you felt was real. And honestly, it was real. That is not the trick. The trick is the timing. They are not coming back because they had some kind of awakening. They are not coming back because they did any inner work. They are coming back because you started to disappear, and their attachment system, which had been perfectly happy keeping its distance while you were still available, suddenly got triggered by your absence. There is an idea in psychology sometimes called the anxiety of loss. It is different from actually wanting to be close to someone. A person can desperately not want to lose something while at the same time not being able or willing to give that thing what it actually needs. And that is exactly what is happening here. They do not suddenly want real intimacy with you. They just suddenly do not want to lose access to you. So they show up just enough to bring your hope back online, just enough to rebuild that emotional connection they let slip. And then once they feel safe again, once they can sense that you are back in your familiar place of reaching for them, they will slowly go back to their old distance and the cycle starts all over again. The second version of the final dirty trick is what I call the vulnerability bomb. This one works especially well on people who are empathetic. And if you have been chasing an avoidant, chances are that is exactly who you are. The vulnerability bomb is when they suddenly open up. They tell you something real, something painful, something they say they have never told another person. They let you behind the wall in a way that feels like a big deal. Maybe they share something from their past, a wound from childhood, a fear they carry, a regret they have been sitting with, and they hand it to you. And it feels like a breakthrough. It feels like finally, this is the moment, this is the closeness you have been waiting for, and you respond the way an empathetic person naturally does. You hold it gently, you make them feel seen, you reassure them, you open up yourself in return. And suddenly you are both in this rare, tender space you have been craving the whole time you have known each other. And it is real. The vulnerability is real, the pain they are sharing is real, but once again, the timing is the trick. They are not opening up because they have decided they want true closeness. They are opening up because your pulling away created a kind of emergency inside their nervous system. And the vulnerability bomb is, in a way, an emergency response. It is their system finding the quickest way back into your emotional investment. Now, I want to be careful here because I am not saying they are consciously manipulating you. Most of the time, they are not. Most of the time, this is not some calculated plan. It is unconscious. Their nervous system finds what works and does it without any real decision behind it, without weighing it out. The part of them that cannot handle losing a connection finds the lever that will bring you back, and it pulls it. But the effect on you stays the same no matter what their intention was. You get pulled back in, your hope comes alive again, your investment comes back, and once the emergency inside them is past, they slide right back into their default setting. The third version is the jealousy play. This one is a little more calculated, though it is often still partly unconscious. They suddenly become more visible, they post more. They mention someone new in conversation, they seem busier and more social, like they suddenly have options you did not know about, and they do not do it in an aggressive way. They do it just casually enough to make you wonder, did they move on? Are they seeing someone? Was I nothing to them? And this taps into something very old in the human brain, the scarcity effect. We want most what we believe we are about to lose. And suddenly the person you were starting to let go of is everywhere in your mind again. Not because you love them more now, but because some old, primitive part of your brain sensed competition and switched on in a completely irrational way. And here is the hard truth about the jealousy play. It works not because you are weak or foolish, but because you are human. Because your nervous system developed in a world where losing a bonded partner was a real threat to your survival. The feeling that gets stirred up is not just emotional, it is biological. It skips right past your rational thinking and goes straight into your gut reaction, and suddenly you find yourself doing the exact thing you had just managed to stop doing. You are reaching back out. You are engaging again, you are back in chase mode, and once they have proven to themselves that you are still there, feel that familiar sense of safety return. And then they settle back into their comfortable distance. The fourth version is the crisis. Something goes wrong in their life, or at least they say it does. A health scare, a family problem, a hard situation at work, a difficult moment they are going through, and they reach out to you, not necessarily saying they need you outright. Sometimes they just mention it, sometimes they just let it slip into the conversation. And you, someone who cares about this person, someone who has been trying to be there for them for months, cannot just walk away from someone who seems to be struggling. That would feel cruel. It would feel like betraying who you are. So you show up, you offer support, you are kind and warm and present, and they feel it. And for a moment, the walls come down a little and you feel connected and it feels real, and it is real. But again, the timing is not a coincidence. Their nervous system picked up on your pulling away and found a way to create a reasonable excuse for you to come back. Again, not always on purpose. Sometimes the crisis is real and reaching out is genuine. But the fact that they reached out to you specifically instead of others in their life is very often tied to the internal alarm your distance set off in them. And once you have shown up, once they have felt your care again, once that internal emergency has passed, they will not suddenly become more available. They will not follow up with more depth or more openness. They will go right back to being the person who keeps their distance. And you will be right back where you started, except now you have given even more of yourself away. The fifth version, and this one might be the quietest and the cruelest, is what I call the mirror move. This is when they start doing exactly what you were doing before. When you were available, they were distant. Now that you are becoming distant, they become available. Not in a big, obvious way, not in a way you could point to and say, look, see what they are doing. But in all the small ways, they respond faster, they reach out more, they seem more interested, they remember little things you mentioned, they check in on you. And from the outside, it looks like growth. It looks like they are finally becoming what you needed them to be. And part of you starts to think, maybe I should stay, maybe this was the turning point, maybe my pulling back finally showed them what they stood to lose. And here is the hardest thing I am going to say to you today. That might be true. That might genuinely be the start of something different. For some avoidant people, facing the real possibility of losing someone does create a genuine shift. It does create a willingness to do the work. It does lead to real change. But you cannot know that yet. And honestly, the avoidant person cannot know that yet either. Because not wanting to lose you is not the same thing as being capable of giving you what you actually need. And until they have done the real inner work, the therapy, the honest reflection, the direct confrontation of their own patterns, any change you are seeing is going to be fragile. It is going to depend on the situation. It is going to be driven by fear rather than growth. And the moment that fear passes, because you are back, because you are available again, because the threat of losing you is gone, the old patterns will return. This is not pessimism. This is not saying people cannot change. People absolutely can change. But real change takes steady, deliberate, sustained effort over time. Change does not happen in 2 weeks just because someone got scared, at least not change that actually lasts. So what do you do with all of this? What do you do while you are in the middle of it? When you have started to pull back, when you have started to feel something like peace, and then the text comes, or the vulnerability, or the sudden warmth, or the jealousy trigger, or the crisis, what do you do? The first thing you do is name it. Not out loud to them, just to yourself. You name what is happening. You say to yourself, I see what this is. I understand why this is happening. This is not them becoming who I needed them to be. This is their nervous system reacting to my absence. These are two completely different things. Naming it does not mean being cold. It does not mean shutting off your feelings. It does not mean you love them less or that none of it was real. It means you are seeing things clearly. And seeing clearly is the one thing that will protect you right now, because the pull is going to be strong. I want you to understand exactly how strong it is going to be, because it is not only emotional, it is physical too. Your own attachment system is going to react to their renewed attention with a rush of brain chemicals, dopamine, oxytocin. The same chemistry of early love is going to fire up all over again. And it is going to feel like confirmation. It is going to feel like proof that this connection is worth fighting for, and it is going to be lying to you. Not about whether the connection was real, because it may have been very real, but about whether this moment represents genuine change, because your brain cannot tell the difference between real change and the temporary activation of an avoidant attachment system. Your brain just registers that they are here and they feel warm, and you feel the way you used to feel, and something inside you says, yes, this is right. So you have to use your mind instead. You have to use the part of you that can see patterns over time rather than just feeling whatever shows up in the moment. And the pattern says this: an avoidant person with an attachment style they have never looked at or worked on will be most interested in you when you are least available, and least interested in you when you are most available. That is the whole pattern in one line. Everything else is just a variation of it, which means if you go back without anything real having changed, you are not stepping into a new relationship. You are stepping back into the same one, just with a short warm-up period before it returns to what it always was. The second thing you do is hold your ground. Not with anger, not with a big speech, not with an ultimatum thrown out from a reactive place. You hold your ground quietly. You respond warmly, but not right away. You stay in the conversation, but not with the same intensity. You do not go cold and silent on them. You do not try to punish them. You simply do not abandon the process of pulling back that you already started. Because here is what most people do when the avoidant person comes back. They swing from one extreme straight to the other. They go from cold silence right into full intense availability. And that tells the avoidant nervous system that the danger is completely past, so they relax right back into their old distance. What you want instead is to hold on to the calmer energy you found while you were detaching, the quieter energy, the less desperate energy, the energy of someone who is genuinely fine whether this works out or not as some kind of tactic, not as manipulation, but because that is actually who you need to become for your own sake. Someone who is truly okay whether or not this one particular person shows up for you. And if you are still working your way there, that is fine. That is the process. You do not have to be all the way there to hold a little ground today. The third thing you do is watch what they actually do over time. Not their words, not a single sweet moment, not the beautiful conversation that happens at 2 a.m. Watch their behavior over time. Are they consistently showing up in a different way? Not just for the week right after they sensed you pulling back, but 3 weeks later, a month later, 2 months later, are they doing the things that would actually prove real change? Are they the ones starting the hard conversations? Are they showing up even when it is uncomfortable for them? Are they facing the patterns that caused the distance in the first place? Are they in therapy? Are they reading, reflecting, actually growing? Or did they do something that looked like change for 2 weeks and then quietly slid back to their old default? Time is the only real test there is. Your nervous system will not want to wait for it. Your nervous system will want to call it growth on day 4 because it feels so good to have hope again. But you have to be the adult in the room. You have to hold the standard that says, I love you and I am open and I am watching how you show up over time, not just in this one moment. The fourth thing you need to understand might be the most important part of this whole conversation. When you stop caring, or more accurately, when you start caring about yourself as much as you have been caring about them, you do not just set off their final trick. You also set something off inside yourself. You set off grief, real grief. Because the story you had been telling yourself about this relationship, the story where they eventually come around, where all that potential finally gets realized, where all that investment finally pays off, that story has to die for you to actually be free. And stories dying is painful, even when the story was hurting you, even when it was keeping you stuck in a cycle that was costing you your peace and your time and your sense of your own worth. And that grief can show up in a lot of different ways. It can look like anger. It can look like obsessive thinking. It can look like second-guessing your choice to pull back. It can look like bargaining, telling yourself that maybe if you had just handled things differently, maybe if you had been a little less anxious, a little more patient, a little more or less of something, it would have turned out differently. And maybe it would have. Or maybe the person in front of you genuinely cannot give you what you need in the state they are currently in, and you cannot love someone into being ready. You cannot wait someone into being whole. You cannot be patient enough to become someone's safe person if they have never learned that another person can even be safe in the first place. That is their work to do, not yours. And I know that is hard to hear because you wanted to be the one. You wanted to be the relationship that finally changed things for them. That wish comes from a good place. It comes from love. But it was always asking you to take responsibility for someone else's healing. And that is not something you can carry for another person. The grief is you releasing that responsibility, and it is one of the hardest releases you will ever go through. But it is also where your actual life starts coming back to you. There is something else that happens when you stop caring that nobody talks about enough. You start to rediscover your own wants. Inside an avoidant dynamic, your desire ends up almost entirely pointed at them. What do they want? What do they need? What will finally make them open up? What approach will finally land? Your inner world becomes organized almost completely around how they respond to you. And when you pull back, there is this strange, sometimes disorienting stretch of time where you do not really know what you want anymore because you have not checked in with yourself in so long. You have been so busy reading them that you forgot how to read yourself. What do you actually enjoy? What do you actually want out of a relationship? What does a genuinely connected partnership look like for you? What does it feel like to have someone show up for you consistently, not with the occasional flash of warmth tucked between long stretches of distance, but consistently, reliably, without you having to earn it every single time? A lot of people who have been in this kind of dynamic find it hard to even picture that. Not because they are broken, but because they have been in this pattern long enough that inconsistency has started to feel normal, even oddly comfortable. Because steady, consistent care can actually feel overwhelming when you are used to chasing. This is one of the deeper effects of the avoidant dynamic that does not get talked about enough. It does not just hurt you in the moment. It resets your sense of what is normal, what is acceptable, what you should even expect from someone. And this reset is often exactly what pulls people back into the same pattern with a new person. They meet someone who is secure and available, and something about it feels off, too easy, too certain, and they find themselves drawn back toward the familiar tension. And being aware of this is part of your healing. Knowing that the pull toward someone unavailable is not love, it is familiarity. It is your nervous system recognizing its own old pattern. And you can feel that pull and still choose something different. Now, I want to talk about something specific, what happens after. Let us say you actually hold your ground. Let us say you keep your distance. Let us say you do not get pulled back in by whichever version of the trick they used on you. What happens next? Usually one of two things. The first is that they escalate. Their efforts get bigger. The vulnerability goes deeper. The availability becomes steadier. And this is actually the more hopeful version. Not because it means they are suddenly fixed, but because it might mean that losing you genuinely disrupted their pattern enough to create a real opening for change. If they are willing to sit with the discomfort of being the one who pursues instead of the one being pursued, if they are willing to start the hard conversations instead of waiting for you to carry all the emotional weight, there might actually be something real starting to grow here. But even then, move slowly and pay close attention. Let time do its work. The second thing that can happen is that they disappear. They sense that the usual tricks are not landing anymore. They sense you are not coming back the way you always used to, and instead of leaning in even more, they pull back completely. They retreat fully behind their walls. They tell themselves, consciously or not, that this relationship has become too risky, that you are no longer the safe, sure option you used to be, that it is better to just cut their losses. And this is going to hurt, even if you were the one who pulled back first, even if you were the one who started all of this. Their full withdrawal is still going to trigger something painful in you, because the hope that they were finally going to change, the hope that was the whole reason you stayed as long as you did, now has to be truly laid to rest. And you are going to want to reach back out. You are going to want to say something that brings them back. You are going to feel the urge to make them understand that you never meant for it to end this way, that you just needed things to be different. And the truth is, that might be exactly what you meant. You might not have wanted it to end. You might have just wanted something real to finally begin. But when an avoidant person who has not done their inner work senses that they can no longer have you on their own terms, they will often choose to not have you at all. Not because they do not care, but because vulnerability without a guarantee of safety is something their nervous system simply cannot process. And you, by refusing to stay endlessly available, by asking for something real in return, became a source of vulnerability for them instead of a source of comfort. That is not your fault. And it does not mean you should have stayed in this dynamic forever, just to avoid that outcome. It means the relationship had reached its real limit, and that limit was always there. You were just working around it quietly, by absorbing all the relational effort yourself. So what do you actually walk away with today? You walk away with clarity. Clarity about the pattern. Clarity about why you did what you did and why they did what they did. Clarity that this final trick is not a sign of their love. It is a sign of their attachment wound reacting to a threat. And that is not the same thing at all. It was never the foundation you actually needed. You walk away with respect for yourself, for the person who kept showing up even when it was hard, for the person who cared deeply and chose love even when it was not being returned the same way. That was not weakness. That was a whole open heart doing its best inside a situation that was built in its very structure to wear it down. And you walk away with permission. Permission to want more, permission to expect consistency without guilt, permission to find someone who does not need you to perform endless emotional labor just to access their basic warmth. Permission to let this particular story end, because there is another story waiting for you, one that does not start with anxiety and end with exhaustion. One where you do not have to decode someone's silence or manage their discomfort with closeness or earn every scrap of connection you get. One where the person standing in front of you is actually genuinely consistently there, and you deserve to find out what that feels like, not after you have fixed yourself enough, not after you have healed every wound, not after you have become perfectly secure and never anxious and completely calm about love. Right now, exactly as you are, with your whole complicated, tender, still figuring it out heart, you deserve someone who shows up for that. The avoidant person's final trick is meant to make you forget all of that, to make you feel small enough and hopeful enough and invested enough that you forget you were ever allowed to want more, that you were allowed to ask for something real, that you were allowed to walk away from something that was slowly making you less like yourself. Do not let the trick work. See it clearly. Name it quietly. Hold your ground gently and keep walking toward the life that is actually waiting for you, because it is waiting. Even if you cannot see it yet, even if the grief of all this has made everything look a little gray right now, it is there, and you are more ready for it than you know.